Next up, we have Will AI change the way we make games art forever? I hope you all are as curious as I am. All this coming up next.
Hello, it's me again. Just when you thought you got rid of me, here I am, back with some new panelists who I'm going to introduce to you now. First of all, we have Ackeem Durrant. Ackeem, how are you doing?
Hello. Nice to be here. I'm good, thank you. How are you doing?
Lovely, all good, thank you. I think we might be coming through your laptop microphone rather than the microphone in front of you. If you want to just double check your settings there, I'll just mute you while you're doing that. Next up, we have Seyed. Seyed, how are you doing?
Hey, George. Hey, everyone.
Hey, how you doing? You good?
Yeah. Thanks so much for inviting me to this panel.
Lovely, good stuff. And finally, we have Micaela Dall. Micaela, how are you?
I'm great. How about yourself?
Oh, doing wonderful, thank you. Trying to think about how a standing desk was a bad idea for a man with a bad back who has to do 2 streams in a row. So if I'm doing this, I'm not doing a funny dance, I'm stretching my back. Wicked. So this panel is talking about how AI is going to change how we make games art forever. Or is it? It has a question mark on it. That's the question we're going to be answering today. I've got some wonderful panelists around me. Why don't we get their stories? How did you folks get to where you are today and playing around with AI within game art? Micaela, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So I'm Micaela. I'm the lead artist over at Silver Rain Games. And I've basically had a pretty roundabout way of getting into technology and art. It started as like a physical sculptor of large props and then eventually ended up in the augmented reality world. And I thought that was really interesting and cool to sort of explore technology and art. But then I started getting more into as well sort of ways that we can use technology to assist us in making art. And then Ackeem actually introduced me to some of the tools that I've sort of been practicing with and playing. And yeah, it was a really interesting, just like, how do we jump into this hybrid of art and technology and creation? So that's sort of a little bit about me.
Amazing. Thank you, Micaela. Seyed, how about you?
So unlike Micaela, I don't have an art background. So I studied physics for a good chunk of my life. And I never intended to get into games, but somehow I ended up in games. So that's quite interesting. My background is mainly to do with physics simulations. I've done a lot of machine learning, both as part of my PhD and also in developing games. And the first game that we were making as part of our company is also incorporating a machine learning model as part of a core game mechanic. So I've done a lot of research into how people are using machine learning and AI into games. And that's basically where I think I can share some of my knowledge.
Wicked, fantastic. Awesome. And Ackeem, how about yourself? Oh, we've got you muted. Hang on a sec. There you go.
Okay, all good. Hopefully this is the right mic now as well.
That sounds grand.
I had a few slides to show as well, if that could help. Because I have some things to show in terms of what I do with AI and how it could be useful.
100%. If you
into context,
I'll bring that in for you.
Nice one.
There you go.
So, hi, I'm Ackeem Durrant. I'm a character artist. I started in film and advertising, and then I moved over to games. You're just gonna see a few characters sliding through, but this is the type of stuff I typically do. Right now, I'm with Silver Rain Games, being at many companies, freelancing, so on and so forth. And I really got into AI. It was just through testing different things in different workflows, but a big part of it was with animation, which you guys will see a little bit at the end. Because I'm a character artist, you always want to get your characters moving as well, where it's like, okay, how do we do that without wasting tons of time rigging and doing everything else? So that's really where it started, and like VR sculpting and stuff like that as well. And then I jumped into Mid-Journey and other places, and that's where I'll sort of start showing off stuff here. But for example, if you had a 15-minute sketch, I'd think, okay, how do we explore different ideas at the beginning of the process, just to know what to do. And this is a sort of exploration of that with Discord diffusion. So it's mainly text prompt based stuff. And this is just showing, okay, I could go this direction, that direction, whatever way. Disco is good because it's very abstract, and we can talk about different softwares and everything. But then what if we want to make something with that? So let's say we pick one of the feathers, then we could go through and sort of do a let's make tileable feathers that we can then turn into actual material. This is Substance Stager, and in this software I just used it to this analyzes the image with AI, denoises it with AI, which used to be a very manual process. But in the last few years, they've been doing a lot of good stuff. So you can make your images. It does the height values and everything for you with just a few inputs. And let's say I made a character as well. So a lot of people's been using art breeders to make faces and things like that. So this is just a practical use of that. I inputted that image below, and then this is the likeness that you can get from it. So just in case on a day-to-day I'm exploring different ideas, different faces, or even need to make faces, AI, again, another good use of it, as well as upscaling those images as well. And this is the example of that animation. Always embarrassing to have myself there, but it goes to show that with this software, it's really cool because you just input your image, and again, mocap, very expensive, very high barrier to entry. But with this software, it's free, available online. Literally put that in, do a Mixamo rig, which is partially AI based, and then you can have something out. So this is just me showing more practical ways to use it rather than, I don't know, AI coming to take everyone's jobs, I guess.
Oh, those were all of my questions gone. Fine. Wicked. Thanks ever so much, Ackeem.
No problem.
So Ackeem's touched on something really interesting there, which Seyed, maybe we can start with you with this question. Then Micaela, I'll come to you in a second. Ackeem's touched on this idea of how we can use this AI in games. I suppose just as a comparison, how do you find AI is being used within games development, specifically around games art today, compared to say a year ago or a few years ago? What do you think, Seyed?
Yeah. So. I from what Ackeem has shown, there are some tools that are used for like denoising or generating some art. For example, using generative adversarial networks, or GAN, which is like one of the models that is like it's like a competition between two models where one is trying to come up with an image that is as good as the data that you've shown it. And using these kind of models, you can basically generate, let's say, like character faces or models based on loads of data that you've shown the model. Now, obviously, there are cons to that, and for example, like there's a limitation to how creative the model can be, because eventually it's based on all the data that is shown the model. So if you, let's say, show 100 images of, let's say, like RPG characters, then the model is going to produce an RPG character, right? Other things with art that I've seen people are doing a lot of research on is specifically around animations. So like motion matching, motion in-betweening, motion tracking with physics-based characters. I know Ubisoft LaForge is doing a lot of work on that. EA has done some work on, especially with sports and martial arts, where you're basically training the data with loads of mocap data and other handmade animations, and the model is trying to fill in the gaps or try to come up with entirely new animations, which could be quite organic. So I think with animations, there is probably something that AI and machine learning can potentially do, but I'm not sure if any games have actually used this technology yet.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Micaela, what do you think? Sort of AI being used now versus a year ago, 2-3 years ago?
Yeah, I think we've used AI for a very long time, even though people might not necessarily realize it. And when we, upscale an image in like Photoshop just to make something bigger, the program has to do something. I think it's just in newer tools that people are starting to recognize that AI has a bit more power than what we sort of initially were using it for. And I think it gives us a lot of freedom to create really interesting things by giving us sort of a tool rather than a sort of a backbone, because you still need to understand art, you still need to understand composition, you're still using these things in certain ways. So I think it's changed in the level that we were able to use it for, but I think at core it's going to be similar to a tool like when Photoshop came around, or when cave artists went from cave art to, oh, now we're painting, to something like, there's always going to be these steps in sort of the creation process. And I know both of you have sort of touched on things like 3D and animation, but I think it'll also be very helpful for something like concept art. I know I did also share some images with you, George. I don't know whether you typically bring them up or whether I share my screen, but
if you share your screen, I'll be able to bring them up for you. But yeah, that's fascinating, and I'm just vamping for you while you find those images. Just while Micaela's got them, lovely. Right, hang on, let me just add that to stream so we can talk about this.
Perfect.
So go and walk us through these.
Yeah, so this is sort of just an example of using it more as a tool rather than as something that's going to create everything. So the top image is actually something that's using disco diffusion, where, I, as an artist, wanted to sort of show something that was a warm color palette in the sort of Western United States with the specific hills and things. So I knew what I wanted, but at the time I didn't have time to do some compositions for things. So I just had the AI do some sort of work and exploration on things. And then when I found the image that I really liked as like a core, I could start using it, and basically made the second image where I did a paint over as sort of like almost like an art direction sort of stage, but also as a concept artist painting over, getting that mood. In this case, You've Died of Dysentery, because it was reminding me of the that old video game. So as a concept art phase, it can really help people find that sort of tool that they're going to be using. And even similar to like character design or illustration, this one's using a different tool, Midjourney, where it gives you, the first image, and you find one that you really wanted. In this case, I was doing something with a woman's body filled with cardinal birds in her rib cage, and then it gave me that fourth one that I thought was cool. And so then I sort of gave this second image that's on the bottom left was the image that the art gave me, and then the final illustration, which I painted over, is the one on the right hand side. So sort of using it as a tool for creating images and sort of giving your brain a chance to, I guess, have a break and then do the important like little fiddly bits and really figuring out stuff can be quite excellent.
And how much information are you giving your programs here? So with the landscape, for example, are you saying how much color you want in there, what types of color you want in there? Or is this something that's, there were 100 others that were generated and one was green?
Yeah, and these ones I only generated about 3 images. So in this case, I knew I wanted to have something that was sort of at sunrise for colors. So I sort of put in that I wanted sunrise, I wanted purple, sort of mood. I wanted gold hints of like plants and fireflies. I wanted those specific sort of hills. So I found locations that I wanted it to do sort of reference for in the real world. So in this case, it was some of the national parks in the United States. So I basically told it these various things that I sort of had as a vague idea in my mind. And then it has taken me a while to figure out what prompts to give an AI that will actually make it give you something, because a lot of times it can take whatever you have and sort of just run with it and not at all make anything helpful. So in these cases, it's taken quite a bit of like saying like, I don't want people, so people -2. I want to have more plants, so plants +3, and sort of using sort of a guiding tool, I guess, for it until you do a paint over in something like Photoshop.
Oh, I think we may have just lost Micaela. Okay. While we wait for Micaela to come back, let's. Well, why don't we build on what Micaela was saying there? There she is.
Sorry, I don't know
Hey,
what happened
Micaela.
there.
Sorry, I think we lost you there for a second.
No worries.
Sorry, do you just want to finish what you were saying?
I don't know where you lost me, so it's fine.
Well, I wanted to follow up with a question, and this goes Ackeem for you and Seyed for you as well. Everyone's mentioned different programs and different bits and pieces here. And one thing I think with any new technology that we're looking at, or at least a new implementation of a technology, one of the questions that's always going to come up is about accessibility and whether there's a paywall that people have to get over in order to start using this stuff. So I suppose, Micaela, why don't you can you just reiterate which programs were you using, and are these the sorts of things that folk can access on their own, or are there versions of that software that folk can access at home?
Yeah, so the first one with the landscape was Disco Diffusion, which is free. It's a Google Colab notebook. There's a lot of very good tutorials that are, on YouTube. There's artists who are happy to sort of explain how to use things. So it's so far for me, once you sort of get past the like, this looks like a scary wall of code, there's only really like 3 buttons that you basically need to concern yourself with and the text prompt. So that one feels like it's quite open. The second one, Midjourney, is still in a sort of like a private beta, I guess, in certain places. I'm sure it will open to everyone eventually, but there are certain tools that aren't available until you sort of learn them. But I think that's like any tool. Like I couldn't just pick up oil paint without actually knowing, hey, I need to use turpentine to clean my brushes rather than water. That's not going to work. There's still an education that has to happen in order to use these tools. But what you sort of mentioned about some of the being able to use these, not necessarily the paywall, but I think it will help people who want to sort of visualize, like even something like if you have aphantasia where you don't see images in your mind, and a lot of artists actually have that. And so this is sort of a nice way of giving artists a chance to say like, okay, I would like this, but there is nothing in my mind. I just know what I want, and I want to create something. And it can be a really nice tool for people who might not necessarily be able to spend the time, or if I have issues with my wrist where I can't draw for long periods of time. So having something give me sort of a backbone and a base of like, here are a bunch of different images I've made that I didn't have to do that will actually hurt my arm eventually. And then I can do the parts that I am able to do to really create it something that is mine rather than something that just the art created, but in a way that is actually helping me as a person who's unable to sort of work at all times. So I think it will actually really help some artists in that regard.
Amazing, thank you. Ackeem, same question.
Hello.
Just about the sort of accessibility and bits like that, and the programs that you were using.
I wanted to, one second, let me just share again so I can talk about it while I'm actively seeing it. So even in terms of this, I want to plug ZBrush Core because that's a free sculpting program and very good for game development, of course. So in terms of barrier to entry, that's brilliant. Anyone watching could just go and do this for free now. As we keep on going, this is Disco Diffusion. So likewise, what Micaela was saying, this is free. Barrier to entry is the internet for this one. And yeah, anyone can get it and start noodling away and trying different ideas. And yeah, even though the barrier to entry is very minimal, the actual act of getting good at it is something within itself, because I've seen artists produce ridiculously good stuff, like a whole set of Star Wars series, for example, based on the film. But if I was to just go in there and write those prompts, it wouldn't come out the same. And there is still some extra craft to it. This one's Midjourney, so that is the paid one in open beta. But again, a very good tool, very cheap for what it is right now. And yeah, you can get more refined images, let's say. Substance Sampler, it comes with a package. So this is a paid software, but it's with Adobe now. Adobe recently bought Algorithmic. So you can buy this as a part of a package, and you can just start using it with Substance Painter, which pretty much everyone uses in the industry, so standard for texturing. So again, not very expensive in the context of what you actually get for it. Art breeders, they are also free, so anyone can get an image, upload it to an art breeder, and just use it. I think you get 5 images a day. I never really need anything extra. It's just literally for ideation. So to have that much power and to be able to generate these types of faces and images just for inspiration, free. And this is also free. So this is Plask, Plask. And yeah, barrier to entry for this one is the internet and a camera. You can use a webcam, you can use a phone camera, you can use whatever you want. Oops, internet off. So yeah, as long as you guys have a camera, then the AI does the rest for you. And again, mocap is extremely expensive if anyone has tried it. And to get it all set up is extremely fiddly and very technical. So to have something like this where I literally just record myself and then just upload it and it does everything else for me with something like Mixamo, which again is free, which is what I used to rig that character in the video. So you have all of these really. I'm a fan of free stuff, so I just recently switched to Blender in terms of the pipeline, because you have all these free programs that all link together and all work seamlessly and create brilliant pipelines. So yeah, barrier to entry is very low right now.
Brilliant. I've seen that video a few times now, and I kind of need to know who burst into the room at the end there.
That was my wife. Of course, she didn't know I was doing something, so she burst in right as I was finishing. I have one there today, bro.
Brilliant, good stuff. Thanks, Ackeem. Amazing. We've got a few questions that are coming in from the chat, and just while we're on the subject of like the software and bits like that, we'll just have a wee look at these. People asking, would you say that software like this would be good for people who are creatively inclined but don't feel like they have the drawing or animating skills? So Seyed, you were talking about coming like from a physics background and stuff like that. Have you found that any of these software kind of, not saying you're not creative, obviously you're extremely creative, but do you find that they help bridge that gap from physics to game making?
Yeah, so I haven't used any of the softwares that were mentioned here because we developed our own machine learning models ourselves. So most of the work we did were just like coding in C++ and Python.
Yeah.
But I think these tools are pretty easier to use than coding this stuff yourself. And I can see that it's probably not a huge barrier to get into because I think the main barrier is really how good the tools are for people who don't have the knowledge of, let's say, AI or machine learning to use them. And to me, it seems that these tools are really good to get started with, even for like non-creative people like myself.
Oh, I'm sure you are creative, Seyed. Micaela, how do you feel? Same sort of question. You know, those folks who are creatively inclined but maybe lack the fine art skills, shall we say, to make that first step into this is my idea.
Yeah, I think it's a really, really good tool for people who want to sort of get started into art, and even things like if you play D&D and you want to make some really interesting landscapes for your campaign and you don't really have time to, design a whole bunch of stuff or even make characters, you can use a lot of these tools as a way of just sort of getting some of that creative spark. I do think for people who want to get into games, especially if they want to do something like the art pipeline, they will still need to obviously learn things and sort of get more of that background of like, I'm going to sort of figure out how I want to, break down the composition and break down the props that might be used and figure out the lighting that we can do sort of a different tool. So I think it depends on what you want to use it for. If you want to just sort of make cool stuff, it's a really great sort of learning spot that doesn't have a lot of barriers in order to make cool stuff. If you do want to use it as more of a games pipeline, I think there is a bit more where you do have to get into that sort of like, how am I going to use this tool? How does it benefit my team and what I'm trying to create? How does it actually sort of I guess produce what we're trying to look for, rather than just like, this looks cool. It looks cool. That's awesome. So I think it really just depends on what you're wanting to do with your career and whether you're just also wanting to play with it.
Yeah, we were talking to the folks from anything.world earlier, and I was just looking at that and thinking, well, that's the next few campaigns of D&D sorted. That's fine. Yeah, some really cool applications of this sort of stuff that we're looking at. Ackeem, Micaela was mentioning a wee bit earlier about sort of when she was applying the AI, sort of like to bring in concept art and bits and pieces like that. The next question that I just want to sort of start with you and get your opinion on is practical applications for AI in games art, and at which stages you see these being most useful. Obviously, we've spoken a lot about preliminary sort of areas, but also, I suppose, what roles within the industry do you think will benefit most from advancements within this sort of technology?
Yeah, well, I mean, in terms of games, that's the thing. I think concept will, but it's more on a, like we said, it's a preliminary basis where it's more ideation that they're benefiting from, if anything, right? Character art will, again, in terms of maybe referencing for faces. For example, I was at a job before where we had to do a lot of likenesses, let's say, but we needed to mix this celebrity with that one. If it looked too close to this celebrity, then there's a PR issue and everything else, right? So art breeders are really good because now we can just mix the faces with that rather than having to wait for the artist to sculpt it, interpret it mentally, and everything else. So it's really just time more than anything. Likewise with audio, there's a lot of audio AI tech that's really cool and really good and saves people some time. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying so. Everything I've shown, none of them are necessarily production ready, but they can get you to a maybe 30% spot or 40% spot a lot quicker. So you end up saving maybe a few hours, right? And this is only the beginning, really, because a lot of these tools are very new. A lot of them are launched within the last, year or two, and they've just been updated to actual usable state. So yeah, in the next, few years, who's to say what's going to happen? But for now, it is more just saving time where it can, but not being used for final production assets.
Sure. Seyed, do you have same opinion, slightly different? So what stages do you see AI being useful? What roles do you see them being most used? And again, when these advancements come in, so we can think about it right now, but perhaps also if it develops.
Sure. I think animations would be one of the ones that probably be coming, like, ready for people to take and start using them in games. Because there is a lot of research happening there. So as I said, like, the tech is almost good enough. It's just that there isn't really the right tools to be adopted by artists to use them. So, and I know, like, some of the researchers who were working at Ubisoft developing these technologies are now hired by Epic Games. So we probably expect to see some of these tech now being migrated to Unreal Engine, for example. I think physics simulations is probably a big one because a lot of the art you do in games, such as, like, let's say you want to show the surface of water or ocean, a lot of them are made using materials which are basically just like shaders. Whereas if you want to go the extra mile and make them quite realistic and reactive to the character motion, then you want them to be simulated. Now, obviously, simulating physics in games is quite heavy on the CPU, but a lot of people are working on using, again, machine learning to try to show smoke, particle effects, water, sand, all of them with machine learning. So I think that would probably be at a later time, but a lot of interesting research are happening there. Yeah. And lastly, I think creating environments and level design using procedural generation, I think, would probably be something that we would see more later, because, again, I think the tools do not exist at the moment such that, like, the artists can just adopt them and use. But I think we get to a point that procedural generation of environments would be easier.
And is that from a production point of view rather than a game like, say, Minecraft that's constantly trying to procedurally generate something? Are we talking more about, okay, I'm making this game, and rather than spend 2 years The Witcher 3 world, I'm going to click this button and now we're going to have something to almost start from?
Absolutely. I think, like, building something like the world for Witcher probably takes tens of artists years to build. So that's a lot of time going into building those worlds. Whereas probably with a very sophisticated procedural generation model, you could create a good chunk of it, or at least create the base of the world and then just start tweaking it.
Like you were saying, Micaela, here's this starting point, and none of this is about replacing artists or 3D artists or any kind of role. It's about having a starting point. I suppose, Micaela, we'll hand over to you on that point, and also, which roles, which stages do you see?
So I do think it will be used by a lot of the different stages, and I do see a lot of pushback and fear from artists right now about robots and artificial intelligence taking jobs and sort of stealing styles and things like that. And I think it's important to remember, especially in things like the if you use a certain style in an AI, that people themselves can steal styles at any time they want. It's not a specifically AI related thing. I think it will open up the chance for people to sort of develop more of their styles and their own desires quickly. And then in the topic of sort of being used, I think the games industry as a whole has had previously quite a sort of toxic working relationship with artists and with everybody in it, where you have to work extreme amounts of hours to sort of prove yourself. You have to output all of this work. And if this can give games a quality sort of where the games are still the same quality, but give people less pressure and less time that they have to be working, or that they can create some interesting things without working 12-hour days and things like that. I feel like it's a really important thing to recognize, as we shift away from trying to use people up in games and trying to give people that work balance, that tools like this might be a great way for us to still develop the same quality of games, or the same quality of production, without doing that to people and giving people those 8-hour or 4-day weeks and things like that. So I feel like it's an important thing to recognize that we as a games industry are changing, and so the AI is just sort of part of that.
Yeah. So one of the questions that's come through the chat, and I'll preface this because obviously I've already said none of this is about replacing artists. Micaela, you've obviously said, and Seyed, you were saying as well, no, these are starting points and we build on top of them. But this question here is asking about programs like Artbreeder getting to a level of sophistication to the point where it can produce something that would be considered production ready level. One, I suppose, do you see that on the horizon? And two, is that not great to hear from an artist's point of view? What do you think? Micaela, we'll start with you and then we'll go back round.
Sure. I mean, I think there is that fear, obviously, but I think it's important to remember, if we have that opportunity to have one person making a bunch of game ready art, what is to stop them from saying, I want to make my own game and I want to start making it in more indie things, and having this sort of surge of more people creating interesting games and interesting narratives, and having these tools that allow them to compete with something like the big companies that they might not be able to leverage the same amount of artists all working on something. So if you give some of these really indie studios the same opportunities to create these amazing things, I can only see really amazing projects coming out in the future. So I think, yes, there is that fear that is very justified, of people saying, oh, am I going to lose my job? Am I going to do this? What's happening? But I think we just have to try and shift as a whole of what opportunities will this open up? Will other people be able to create games? Will this, create extra jobs that are different? Will this sort of, I think we're just emerging with it. And because we're at the start, that's where a lot of that fear sort of comes from.
Yeah, absolutely. Seyed, same question, I suppose. Levels of sophistication reaching to a point where it's production ready. Do you see it happening? Does it worry you at all, or is it just exciting?
I pretty much agree with everything Micaela said. I don't think AI would replace humans in this industry. It would just make everything cheaper and easier to do, and would increase the quality of the work that comes out. Which means one single artist, just compare how much work one artist can get done today compared to 20 years ago. It's astronomically huge difference on what could be done. And I think it's the same thing. Maybe 10 years from now, an artist can do the animations, do the concept art, do the 3D modeling and all of that by herself in a short frame of time, which means it just gives a lot of opportunities for indie developers to make games hopefully with much less budget.
Yeah, fantastic. And Ackeem, again, just to sort of level the same question at yourself, and I'll do you know what? No, ask that question, then I'll follow up with just something else for you, Ackeem.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say the same thing. Yeah, it's at the stage where I do think that it will get sophisticated enough to produce production ready in a sense, right? So, for example, let's say our art director or a casting agent wants to get a list of characters, they can then go and do that themselves. But then for them to have to 3D model that and everything else, they still need a team, they still need people. And the fact is that games is becoming less centralized. There's becoming more small teams, more outsourced teams anyway. It's a natural part of the process. If it wasn't AI, it would probably be packs of assets or something else, right? MetaHuman, for example, which is probably going to merge with AI and then become something else within itself. So it's naturally going to happen. This is just another way of processing it.
Fantastic. And just to sort of build on that question a little bit, obviously we're talking about what the future might look like. If you had to sort of give your best guess, what direction do you think things are going in the next, let's say, 3 to 5 years? And just because obviously we're thinking this is a career festival, how can artists and other, developers who are anticipating and excited for the inclusion of AI in game development, how can those folks best position themselves, do you think, to sort of ride that wave, be part of that next step? Ackeem, can we start with you?
Okay, cool. Personally, I think it's a lot of the same stuff in terms of, for example, I'm a character artist. You have to know anatomy, you have to know how drapery works, you have to know the individual softwares and everything else. The AI is more the icing on the cake. You can use that to supplement certain things so I can gather references faster. It's similar to photo bashing when that came in. A lot of people were reluctant to use it, but then people started using it, saved a lot of time. It didn't replace concept artists at all. AI is just that. In terms of studio-wide, like Seyed was saying, there's a lot of animation stuff that's really cool. Even Naughty Dog did it on Last of Us 2 to get animations linked and stuff like that. It's just the production quality was insane, right? So if studios leverage that or try to research that in the background, likewise with spline technology and hair, it's just going to improve the quality. So if they can get small little teams doing that type of work, getting the tech ready, while leveraging the normal stuff that we already do and using procedural environment placement with artists obviously going in there and doing the handcrafted touches, it's a brilliant working atmosphere.
Amazing. Micaela, same sort of question. Do you have a different opinion or just want to build on Akeem's answer there?
I think it's very similar. So if you're getting into games, I think keeping an open mind and sort of learning a lot, similar to what you would do anyway if you were, wanting to take education or go into things, look at what other people are doing with the tools and go into those, Discord groups where people are sharing their knowledge and learn from people and sort of see where there is pushback. Like, let's say, using things like a certain artist style and where that pushback comes from, and sort of understanding why people might feel concerned about those things, but then just like look at how you can also sort of learn from that and take your own style, and really just at that base core being open and happy to sort of learn things and Google stuff and all of that, I think is very important for any sort of new artist getting into games.
Yeah. Seyed, how about yourself? Next sort of 3 to 5 years, where do you see it going and how can folks position themselves?
Sure. I think a lot of these tools would be integrated within game engines such as Unreal and Unity. As we've seen, a lot of that has already been happening, such as the volumetric clouds, hair simulations, cloth simulations, all of these which were not available 10 years ago as plug and play tools. So I do imagine a lot of these AI tools would become available in game engines as just plug and play. So my advice is probably, again, like as Micaela said, just try to stay on top of the kind of latest technologies, what game engines can do, what other softwares can do. Just see what other artists are doing in the space, what kind of tools they're using. I think that's already a great resource.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are obviously plenty of communities out there as well for these different things, one of which is the Intergames Discord. Get in there, intergames.org/Discord. We've got a question here that, Seyed, I think perhaps would be best sort of leveled at you. This person's asked, you're all mentioning AI tools to build and create characters and environments. How about AI tools that support and help with coding in games?
I'm not aware of any AI tools that support coding, but again,
do you see it happening?
I think Unreal Engine has already done a great job with visual scripting, where instead of coding, you're just dealing with a bunch of nodes and connecting together. I think that's already a huge step forward. Probably the next step is something like Roblox, where you can make a game without really knowing much coding. I do believe that no code or low code would become a thing, as we're already seeing a lot of that happening.
Yeah.
But again, like, this is something that probably needs to be promoted by game engines,
Yeah.
because the entire market is really dominated by UE and Unity.
Yeah, for sure. Seyed's mentioned Roblox there, and we just had the designing games in the metaverse panel, and I know it's a very, very contentious thing, and some folks are really, really, quite skeptical about development within the metaverse. But I brought it up in that panel, and I'll bring it up here, almost just reversing the question. We were talking about persistent worlds and how obviously communities will generate the content for that, but perhaps there's potential for AI to be developing content. So this persistent world, no user caps, and it's growing and growing and growing. How do you see, or do you see there being space for what we're talking about here being used in that kind of development space? Ackeem, I suppose we'll start with you.
I think that's going to happen naturally. I guess it's similar to if a product comes out and then you have the AI bots going in and buying everything. It's just going to be like spam kind of change and different assets and stuff like that. But whenever that happens, it's very transparent, and for example, the DAS community has their own modelers. The UE asset market has its own people as well. And again, I'm sure that that's happening there, where people are using AI in the background to generate a lot of things. But then there's still always going to be a market for other things, for more personalized things. And yeah, really, if someone just has a niche or a style, there's usually going to be a space for them online with, about other 2 billion, 5 billion people using the internet, right? So
yeah, of course. Micaela, how do you feel about that?
Sorry, repeat the question.
So in regards to metaverse as a space being this persistent world, and yes, there's going to be elements that are community driven and like in order to make content there, but do you see there being a space for AI? And again, I suppose we're thinking in the future where this becomes slightly more sophisticated. But
yeah, I mean, there certainly will be spaces. Like, I think no matter what the internet or the metaverse or sort of the world it develops into, people are going to find places where they connect with other people and where they share work. Like, if you look back at any time in the sort of past sort of age of the internet, there has been forums that have been created, and then there's specific sites where people hang out, and then there's the discords. And so as things develop, I think people will always find places to connect and share artwork, and find places, things like, if it is the metaverse, finding places that they can share and that they find other people who are inspired by themselves, and sort of all of that. I think it's just sort of a natural evolution of community and creation, I guess.
for sure, I'm showing my age here, but it just puts me in mind of MSN chat and getting two bots to talk to each other.
Yeah.
Many an evening spent doing that. I wasn't sad. It was fine. I had friends. Seyed, what do you think about same sort of question? So metaverse, using AI to sort of grow those persistent worlds and stuff.
Sure. Well, I personally think if there is going to be a persistent metaverse, then the majority of the content would be user generated, because that's the whole point of being in a metaverse. If you can't create content for it, then where's the fun? And we can see that in Roblox and Minecraft, where really the fun is in making the content and sharing it with everyone. Now, if it's a persistent world, it means your content would remain there and would continue existing there, and other people can take it and modify it in any way they want. So I think it's going to be really interesting. I think the role that AI would play is really trying to help content creators create content. Again, as I said, like things like low code or no code, or just helping non-creative people like myself to be able to create assets and share it with everyone else. I think that's where the AI would be.
Sure. Fantastic. We've spoken about images here. One of the questions that's coming in from the chat is, what do we think of video AI footage? So moving away from perhaps those concept images and more into, I don't know, concept videos, that sort of thing. Micaela, why don't we start with you with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very similar to when you see a, big Marvel production and they've got explosions and things going on. They had to use tools in order to generate, a certain explosion or, an alien worlds. There was that's very similar to video and using AI for um, those tools. So I think if it comes to a point where we're able to use it, it's just going to be exactly the same as any other tool that we're able to use, where you still need some of that human guidance. You're still trying to figure out what you want to say with that product. If robots do get to a point where they can make really amazing, like, entire Marvel films, cool. Maybe the robots themselves will also be watching it, and they'll be making stuff for themselves. Like, I think it's just a really cool. I think it's cool. And
I
yeah.
think I think AI might have written the script for Ant-Man and the Wasp. I think that's why that turned out the way it did. Just a little bit of shade for Ant-Man and the Wasp. Ackeem, what do you think about video AI?
So the Plusk images, that's one example, right? Using it for mocap, that's brilliant. There's another one that I've used. I can't show any work from it, but it's called Ebsynth, and it's basically a style transfer program where you can get, for example, you have realistic you and your dad in the background, and you can get a Simpsons screenshot, line it up, and then you can transfer that style over onto your footage, and the AI will propagate it to everything else. Another really cool use for it is, let's say, and this is a practical use for simulations, for example, in terms of video. So what I did at work was, let's say I have a low-res model, but I have a high-res sculpt, but I want to put physics on it. If you simulate that on a high-res sculpt, it's going to take forever, really expensive, So all you'd have to do is just run that low-res simulation and then just propagate that through the rest of the footage with your high-res sim. So stuff like that, extremely cool, saves a lot of time. Again, the software and tools aren't actually built to support that yet, but in the future, I predict someone will see that niche and see that gap and say, let me just build this, and that will become a thing, and save a tons of times, just like denoising, for example. Saves a ton of time and is actively helping us now with games and ray tracing, as well as deepfakes. That's a really important one when we talk about video, right? And a lot of artists right now, what you're seeing is people taking metahuman models, for example, making something close. Yesterday, I saw one of Tom Cruise. So you make a model close to Tom Cruise. It looks very uncanny. It doesn't look like Tom Cruise, but then you deepfake Tom Cruise's faces on top of that. All of a sudden, it's Tom Cruise. So in terms of film and games, people are already doing it, and these are people at home.
Yeah.
Studios can easily pick this up and work it into a pipeline as well. So it's there pretty much in terms of that.
Oh, fantastic. Seyed, same question, I suppose. Video AI, how do you see the application of it and so forth?
Yeah, I could agree with what Ackeem said here. And I think the two ones that I'm quite interested to see how they would unfold in the future are style transfer and physics simulation. So since Ackeem talked about style transfer, I'm going to show a quick video on what it would look like. I don't think any game has successfully used it yet,
Okay.
but I do think it's a very interesting technology to create some very cool effects in games. So this is a video by Google Stadia where you basically take an image and you transfer this style to your game, and your game just adopts that style. So it's kind of like I think in game dev terminology, it's like a post process where the style is layered on top of your game. But again, I'm not sure whether this would have practical applications, but it's a cool thing. Another one is with physics simulations, where you can basically massively improve very complex physics in games using AI. And as you can see, we have the ground truth and the prediction. Prediction is nearly real time, so you can use it in games, whereas ground truth needs to be calculated for hours and hours. So I think this is also a very interesting space to look out for.
Fantastic. Oh, don't stop it. That was mesmerizing. Good stuff. Fantastic. I'm seeing the time. We've got about 10 minutes left, so I'd really like to encourage the chat just to get their last questions to us. That'll be passed over, and I'll ask everyone that we have here to answer it as best they can. A beautiful cat. Oh, blurred out. That's an AI cat. You can't trick me, Micaela. So I just thought we'd touch on something that's kind of taking the internet by storm at the moment, Dall.E, and how far we see this as just a fun fad or maybe the future. So I don't know if someone just wants to kind of outline what Dall.E is, just for anyone who's not particularly clear in the chat, and then maybe we can just do a very brief dive into how we think it's doing, essentially. Micaela, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So I think Dall.E is being used so prevalently specifically because it's so open and you can generate something in like 3 seconds just by typing in a text. And so it's very similar to any of the other AI tools where it is a tool that has its own sort of style and things that's able to produce. So I believe they have like a Dall.E mini right now where anybody can test stuff, but I think the actual Dall.E like program, I'm not even sure how you get into that. I haven't looked at that one.
Beta or something, isn't it?
So I think it's a very closed beta. I'm not sure, but it's very open to anybody right now just to do little things. And I think it's one of those like, it's like a meme. You can do whatever you want with it and it's great. Whereas something like Disco Diffusion that can take, 15 minutes to half an hour for an image, depending on what you're doing, has a little bit more of that like studios can use it rather than Dall.E, where it's just like, okay, I want to have SpongeBob in Call of Duty, and then it does 9 versions of that, and you're like, cool.
Yeah.
So I think it's a tool just like any of the other ones. It'll be interesting when it does come out as something that anybody can use. I'm very excited to sort of see how that happens.
Yeah. Seyed, do you want to just build on that? How do you feel about it? Is it something that interests you, or does it seem a little bit surface level compared to what you're doing at the moment?
Yeah, I'm a bit uncertain on whether if you can make actual games out of such tools, like games that you can actually take to market and people would have fun. But they're interesting stuff. So I think there's another startup called Anything World who are doing similar things where you can basically just say, I want like dolphins flying over mountains, and it just builds the environment for you. Again, I'm not sure how practical they can be in making games, but I think that they're interesting technologies.
Yeah, we spoke to Anything.World. They were our first panel, so if you want to have a look at what Seyed's referencing there, go back in the VOD. It's the first hour. And Ackeem, how do you feel about Dall.E? Meme or some practical use?
I mean, you can make memes with practical things, right? That's what they're made with. So I think that it's both. But in terms of what I said earlier, I think it's more for like, let's say we're making a pitching document for a game or film. It very much works because you can easily, well, the director can sit down with the producer, generate the pitching document for the ideas, and then pitch that to a team, and everyone can be on the same page with what they're doing. That's the main use for stuff like that, especially for image generation. Now, let's say they start generating for 3D, which again I've seen application for, or you start making humans projecting back on a 3D mesh, use AI to line it up and stuff like that. That's when we're talking a different territory, or just meta humans with AI. That's a different ballpark a little bit, where it's now encroaching more and more on production, such as deepfake. That's encroaching more and more on production because that really helps a lot of pipelines. But yeah, it's supplementary. It's not going to get rid of anything. People are going to predominantly use it for memes, but maybe casting directors and so on will just use it to get ideas out and put that in a folder somewhere so they can reference it to an artist.
Does anyone have any particular favorites that they've seen knocking around on Twitter from Dall.E? SpongeBob in Call of Duty sounds like a good one, Micaela.
I don't even know. To be honest.
Not seen any?
No.
I did see a question from somebody in the chat that I'd like to answer if I have a minute. Somebody was asking about if our studio itself is actually using some of these technologies in like game production, because it's easy for us to talk about it, but to actually see if it's actually being used. And so our studio itself, I'm sort of like the lead artist hybrid with art director. So I am using things like Disco Diffusion to generate images for mood and for sort of places that I know I'd like to reference for certain things in the game. I will use Disco Diffusion to generate things, which I then can give to my concept artists as saying, like, this is some stuff that I would like to use as sort of our jumping off point for mood and for what you should be sort of exploring in terms of like shapes and things like that. So yeah, we are actually using some of these in our production pipeline, but it doesn't replace anything at this point, because as we've talked about, it's definitely still it's a tool to get sort of the ground going. But as somebody who's sort of art directing things, it's been very helpful for me to quickly do some stuff that I might not have time, because I'm also juggling a bunch of other things, but I can better support my team with sort of, this is what mood we're going for, this is what my vision is for things, and then giving them a chance to actually like jump off from that. So it's been very helpful for our team to just have a quicker understanding of what me as a sort of director want on things. And then my team has been great and make really cool stuff. So yeah, we've definitely been using it like on a regular basis.
Yeah. To chime in a little bit as well, with Plask, I used that on one of the characters we were making just to get the moveset down over rough movement. Because, for example, we needed to know how big this character was when it was hunched over. But rather than having to send that to animation and rigging and take it through the pipeline, I just did it in Mixamo, which again, AI-driven rigging program, and then just spit it out into Plask, and then you have your reference point right there.
Fantastic. It's also exciting. I suppose if you were to put the headline on this, just as we sort of wrap up, we've got just a few minutes left. But if we were just to put a kind of headline on this about why we're excited about what's coming up, what would your headline for that be, Ackeem? Why don't we start with you? Why is this so exciting? What's about to happen? What's coming next?
For me, it's exciting simply because it makes me able to do more things without spending a year, investing hundreds of hours like I did to do 3D modeling, texturing, and everything else. But now I can jump into or dip my toes in other disciplines and get decent enough results out. And that's the biggest exciting thing to me.
Okay, Seyed, how about you?
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with what Ackeem said. But on top of that, I also think with AI, you would be able to do things that were not possible to do before. For example, like style transfer. It's really interesting. You can create new images and videos that were absolutely impossible to do before. So I think it just enables a lot of new mechanics in games, a lot of new art style in games. So that's quite interesting.
Yeah. And Micaela, how about you?
Yeah, if I could have any like thing that the AI sort of impacts, is I'm hoping we get a wave of really, really cool indie games, like people who just want to create something and they have a passion for it, but they're just one person or a small team of people. And I just want like interesting games, like there's just so many things that you can do out there and so many stories that people want to tell, and experiences, even if they're short, if they're long. I think that's going to be one of the really cool things that AI, sorry, my cat likes to scream.
No worries at all.
Yeah, I think she's also excited about AI. Making games about cats. So yeah, that's what I'm most excited for.
Lovely. And like you say, that accessibility, that democratization of folks being able to access game making who don't necessarily, we know, Oggy, who don't necessarily have that, that background of being able to code, being able to draw, being able to,
Exactly.
do absolutely every element of it. Fantastic. We've got a couple minutes left. So I'm just going to give you guys an opportunity to plug your socials. What have you got coming up? Where can folks find you? Ackeem, why don't we start with you?
I have nothing exciting coming up right now. Eventually I would, I guess, but I work for Silver Rain Games as well, which I don't have down here. We're working on something to be announced, so again, can't share too much, but look out for Silver Rain Games, I guess. And you can follow me, Ackeem Durrant, at all my social medias.
Wicked. And if you're not going to leak. Maybe Micaela will. Go on, what's Silver Rain worth?
Unfortunately not. We are working on cool stuff, but yeah, you can find us over at Silver Rain Games, but you can also find me at Micaela Dawn, or I think Dawn Micaela on Twitter, because I think I made a Micaela Dawn when I was 12 and then forgot the password. So curse myself, but you can find me sort of Micaela
Past
Dawn
Micaela.
all over the place. And I'm always happy to chat about art, games, anything. If anybody wants to reach out, I'm always happy to.
Wicked, amazing. And Seyed, how about yourself?
Yeah, you can find about us at UnifiQ.com, and my socials are there. So I have some good articles on Reddit, so make sure to have a look at them. I specifically have one article about physics simulations and machine learning in games, so I think you would enjoy that.
Amazing. Well, it just leaves me to say thank you to our wonderful panelists, to Ackeem, Seyed, Micaela, and Oggy the cat. Thank you so much for your generosity with your time here, folks. You've been told where to find them. There are links in the chat to all the programs that everyone's been speaking about. Make sure you have a look at those. Thank you again to the wonderful panelists. Coming up, we have I've got a job in blockchain. What now? That's the next panel that's coming up. Thank you ever so much, everyone. It's bye from me.